Story 1. The Bathtub. I spent my teenage years in a suburb of Boston. 2 or 3 times during that period, probably about midnight, well after my parents and younger sisters were long asleep, I heard the plastic drinking cup from the bathroom fall into the adjacent bathtub and bounce around before coming to a complete stop. Upon investigating, the cup was always where it was supposed to be, by the sink. I never mentioned this to anyone out of fear of ridicule. About 10 years later, my youngest sister and I were talking about ghosts, and, unprompted, she told me that she used to hear the sound of a plastic cup falling into the bathtub late at night. Of course, when she would get up to investigate, all would be as it should. There were other oddities as well. Once, while running up the stairs from the first to the second floors, I saw what appeared to be a translucent foot, but it disappeared in a heartbeat, and I never saw it again. The time, 1:18 p.m., seems to have been connected to the phenomenon. One day, my pocket watch stopped at 1:18. The next day, it happened again. Maybe it was a coincidence. A few days later, it happened again, and so did the clock on my desk. I soon replaced that old wind-up clock with an electric alarm clock. A month or 2 later, my pocket watch stopped at 1:18. Quickly, I looked at the electric clock. Then I caught myself and laughed. Electric clocks don't just stop. But sure enough, it was still moving. But it was running backwards. Story 2. At the movies. I work at the only movie theater in operation in my town. A few weeks after I started working there, another employee came to me and told me that he thought he saw a ghost while he was working in Theater 12. This particular employee is normally under the influence of something, so I didn't quite believe him. He told me that he saw a grown man sitting in the 3rd or 4th row on the left aisle in a seat against the wall. He said that he saw him when all the lights were off. Even the aisle lights were off. The only light illuminating the room was the exit sign above the door on the other side of the theater. So it was basically pitch black in there. He also added that it did not look like any special FX ghost that he had seen on TV. He said that it didn't glow or anything like that. But it was still visible in the pitch dark. During that same week, one of the managers told me what had happened to them one night. She said that she was downstairs talking to the concessionist after the theater had closed. So those two and the projectionist were the only ones in the theater besides the janitors. Well, anyway, the two downstairs were talking, and the projectionist came downstairs and asked if anyone had came upstairs. The manager said no and asked him why. The projectionist told her what had happened. He said that he was shutting down the projectors when he ran around the corner to shut off 12 and he saw someone standing in the doorway to the stairwell that leads to the theater, number 12's exit door. He said the man stared at him for just a split second and then vanished. The manager assured him that there was no one else in the building except for them and the janitors, and no one had been up there. All the janitors had been cleaning in the lobby, and that's where she was sitting, talking to the concessionist. Later, more people were getting freaked out by all the stuff happening. So one of the other ushers asked his older brother that used to work at the theater about 6 or 7 years ago if he knew anything, and he found out some scary information. Theater numbers 11 and 12 were added onto the building much later after the rest of the theater had been built. Numbers 11 and 12 were built differently than the others. They were also set sort of away from the rest of the building, and one of the construction workers had died of a heart attack while working on this addition. One of the men said that he has heard his name yelled directly behind him, and he'll turn around and there'll be no one there. It only happens when he's upstairs by theater number 12. Many have said they've heard footsteps around the stairwell and around the projector of number 12. Many other employees have said that they have seen someone sitting in the seat against the wall in the third or fourth row on the left-hand side, and always when all the lights are off in the theater. I personally have never seen him, but I do usually get chills or goosebumps when I walk into that theater. I also notice that the projector for number 12 messes up a lot, and when it messes up really bad. Story 3. My Tormentor. I have been tormented, scared out of my mind, and had jokes pulled on me for years by what I and my friends and family believed to be some sort of spirit or entity. It all started when I was 9 years old, and my father sent me to bed. I was never really scared of the dark, so my father would allow me to tuck myself in, and that night was going to be different. My room was on the top floor of a 3-story house, and I never made it to the 3rd story. I thought I saw something move in the darkness of the 3rd floor, and then I heard very clearly someone say my name. By the 2nd time this happened that night, my father had to carry me kicking and screaming to bed. This started happening at least twice a week. I became very afraid of the dark. And one time when my father made me walk down a dark hallway, something brushed against me. It scared me so bad that my dad found me curled up in a ball on the floor. Things started happening around the house, like vases being broke, mysterious stains appearing on the floor. I spent most of my childhood in trouble for things that I didn't do. And the more trouble I was in, the more things would happen to get me into more trouble. I was convinced that the house was haunted, and whatever was haunting the house didn't like me at all. I finally convinced my father to allow me to move in with my mother the next town over. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I thought I'd escaped. And then one night my cousin spent the night, and it all started again. We were watching television, and suddenly the TV turned off. I got up to turn it back on, and as soon as I did, it turned itself back off again. This went on several times, and my cousin tried to turn it on himself. When he got up, something pushed him back into the chair. He didn't even have time to scream before the television turned itself off and on rapidly, and then the whole power to the house went off, leaving us in the dark. My mother took him home that night, and he never spent another night again. I'm in my 20s now, and if I wrote everything that happened, it would take days. It would fill a book. This has ruined my life. I failed out of college because whatever it was that was haunting me, tormenting me, wouldn't let me sleep at night. It drove every single roommate I've had away. My first week there, I had to get 8 copies of my schedule. Even if I wrote it down in my notebook, the paper would go missing the next day. I just want to live a normal life. But whatever this is won't let me. Story 4. The Ghost Train. I live in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half north of Harrisburg. This story happened to a coworker of mine. Jamie, my coworker, was seeing a guy named Doug, who had heard stories about this old abandoned house north of the city where strange things were said to have occurred. It was set back at the end of a dirt road, quite a distance from the highway, next to an old railroad track. This old brick house was supposed to have been a temporary hospital during the Civil War. Word of mouth had it that a group of people went inside to look around, and someone commented that there was an awesome view from the bathroom. His companion led him back to the room and showed him that that same window was in fact bricked over. Doug convinced Jamie that they should check it out, and they drove out there, over the railroad tracks, and parked in front of that old house. It looked so foreboding that Jamie, who was driving, decided that she didn't want to go in. She turned around to head back. They didn't get far. Her car stalled out on the railroad tracks. Surprised and half jokingly, Doug asked Jamie what she was doing. "Nothing," she said, frantically trying to restart the engine. "I'm not doing anything." Jamie turned the key over and over, but the engine wouldn't catch. Suddenly, they were surrounded by fog so deep they couldn't see in front or behind them. Jamie panicked and scrambled for the door handle, but Doug restrained her and said, "You're not going anywhere." Then they heard a train whistle. Doug and Jamie looked to the right and saw the glare of a single headlight coming directly towards them. Jamie put her head forward, closed her eyes, gripped the steering wheel as tight as she could. She screamed and braced herself for a collision, but all she felt was a whoosh of air going right through her, past her, and all around her. She described it as an energy force. Immediately afterwards, the fog blew away as if it was by magic. Jamie grabbed the key in the ignition, turned it, and the engine started up with no problem. Jamie jammed her foot down on the accelerator. The tires squealed as she drove as fast as she could away from this. And they've never been back. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I do appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Bye.